Okay, tonight the focus, as it said in the advertisement, was to focus on two aspects, two different types of disabilities that are very prominent in the news today, and everybody certainly talks about them on an ongoing basis. And the one is the whole concern about children with autism, and why the rise and what's really happening out there and what's going on. And the second aspect of it relates to children and adults, for that matter, with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Okay, where should we start? Maybe we can start with ADHD. That's common enough. It's certainly much more common disorder than is autism. And good, we have a question. Let me, and the question is, so far, I think we can go to pretty quickly and just see what that is. Amy's calling in and saying that her daughter has a dual diagnosis of autism and mitochondrial disease, a mitochondrial disorder. And her ADHD is severe. We have tried Adderall and Concerta. With Adderall, she became screaming and head banging within a couple of hours of her first dose. And with Concerta, it took 3 months for the same reaction, non-stop screaming. What are my thoughts? Okay, so I told you that, and maybe I'm just going to give some background about ADHD and before we go any further with any other questions. So ADHD, we're talking about children, or adults for that matter, with inattentiveness, with distractibility, with impulsivity, and with hyperactivity. Those are the three most important aspects of ADHD. We have the hyperactivity. Some children, as we know, are very hyperactive and impulsive, and others are not so hyperactive and impulsive. And other children are just the inattentive type of ADHD. They're very forgetful, they have difficulty with task persistence, they're very easily distracted in different situations, they pay attention to other things way out there far better than they do to information which is coming directly to them. They're often what we would maybe consider in la-la land, just like out there and spacing out and just not paying attention to absolutely anything. And of course, they don't get their work done as a consequence to that, and it often impacts them significantly. The more prototypical type of ADHD is the hyperactive, impulsive boy who's constantly out of his seat and jumping around and moving about. That's a different type of ADHD. So we have the hyperactive, impulsive type of ADHD, then we have the inattentive type of ADHD, and sometimes we have both together. I don't imagine that there's one person out there who would not tell me, you know what, I'm often inattentive, and I'm often distractible, and I'm often forgetful. And that's true. It's an absolute normal human condition to be inattentive and to be distracted, evidence-based. And that is the use of different medications, mostly stimulants as well as non-stimulant type of medications, to address those with ADHD. We have a big book, very large book, full of every medication under the sun. And when it comes to talking about the medication that we've just heard about, Adderall we've heard about, Concerta we've heard about, when it comes to looking at those medications, it's very interesting, because if you look at that reference as to what the side effects and the effects of that medication are, when doctors look at that book, it's a very interesting socially responsive from another. And just because you can say ADHD, to one person it might be someone who's distractible, way out there in la-la land, as I just spoke about, and to another person, ADHD might be an incredibly hyperactive, very difficult, impossible child who's climbing the walls and is beating people up on the head. That's the first thing. The second thing is, kids with ADHD, and adults as well, rarely have ADHD alone. They almost invariably have something which we call comorbidity. Comorbidity, or co-occurring disorders, implies that there's almost always something else in addition to the ADHD which is present in any particular child. One of the commonest comorbidities, for example, is children with learning difficulties. Reading difficulties is especially the case. Reading comprehension is especially the difficulty with kids with reading difficulties, the reading comprehension aspects of that problem. Other children might be oppositional and defiant. The real difficult children who refuse to obey and who are defiant with almost every single request. Others might even have more severe behavioral problems than that. Others might have co-occurring or comorbid anxiety problems, and their treatment is going to be different. Others might have co-occurring problems with social interaction. Others might have difficulty with many other different aspects of a child of functioning, with chronic illnesses, with depression, with abuse situations. I rarely, if ever, see a child who simply leaves my office with a diagnosis of ADHD. There's almost always co-occurring phenomena. And in that context, once there are co-occurring phenomena, the treatment changes dramatically. Because we believe, at least my orientation is, to first of all come up with an excellent description of the overall child, their strengths and their weaknesses. And out of that description of the overall child with their strengths and their weaknesses, looking at how well they succeed in some areas and what challenges there might be in other areas, we call that the description. And the prescription follows the description. Once we have a very good understanding of what a child's capacity is in a variety of different contexts, then we can come up with a good prescription for actually what happens. Now, you did give me a little bit of a hint in your question to say that that child also had autism and mitochondrial disorders. And one just word about children who do have co-occurring ADHD and autism, we'll get into some details about autism maybe later, is that kids with autism are very often very finicky children as far as many different things, as far as eating habits is concerned, about behavioral interventions, and also we know full well about their response to different medications. And that is why the most commonest reason that I see for children to have untoward side effects with autism is when their co-occurring conditions are treated with medications which are indicated for that co-occurring disorders, but are treated at higher levels, at higher dosage levels, which they should be. So children with autism usually require much lower dosages, much lower dosages. So if we traditionally start a child with ADHD, say for example on 10 milligrams of methylphenidate, in autism I would start with 5, or maybe even sometimes 2.5, and maybe even sometimes less than that. Because the untoward side effect that Amy is speaking about is commonly seen. And unfortunately, some of the medications you refer to don't necessarily come in very low dosage forms, which implies to me that that would be a situation. And if your child indeed does have, Amy, a co-occurring mitochondrial disorder, and on top of that, even more the case, that first of all, you should look carefully at co-occurring conditions. You should look carefully at the behavioral modification program that you actually have set up to make sure that they are appropriate both for kids with autism as well as for ADHD. And maybe later on we can talk about some of the possible nutritional implications of having those two disorders as well. So that's Amy's question. Now there's a second question that comes from Circulum, and Circulum asks, what is your opinion on medicating children with autism, and how helpful is Prozac to treat children with autism? I think you've already guessed my orientation. It's a very holistic, comprehensive approach to these children. There's no treatment that I jump to as far as, oh, he's got autism, must we try this particular medication? Absolutely not. The first aspect, and much more so in autism than in ADHD, is to come up with a very comprehensive behavioral intervention program. And unfortunately, services to actually get these kinds of programs are not that too many, and they're not cheap either. But there's no shortcuts. The importance of having a behavioral-based intervention to address the children with autism, provided intensely and comprehensively throughout the day and throughout the week, is absolutely paramount. That is the only evidence-based intervention as far as children with autism is concerned. Now, we can treat co-occurring conditions, and we can also treat, for example, children who are extremely irritable and who have autism as well. The FDA has only made one indication for only one particular medication, and that's Risperdal, for children with autism and coexisting severe irritability and aggressive behaviors. It is only in that context that the FDA has actually made any recommendations. Now, doctors have always used medications which we are considered to be off-label. So it just means that they haven't been FDA approved for the use of children for that particular condition. And for example, the circulum asks about the possible use of Prozac or fluoxetine. Fluoxetine is an antidepressant. It's an anti-anxiety medication. It's an SSRI. And if a child with autism does have comorbid or co-occurring anxiety difficulties, then, and is in fact an anxiety disorder being diagnosed in addition to the autism or over and above the autism, then there might be a consideration for the use of fluoxetine. Once again, would consider very small dosages. Unfortunately, up until now, there hasn't been much luck that scientists have had, including in our own studies here in Phoenix, to actually come up with any significant improvement with the use of Prozac, or the use of fluoxetine, rather, over placebo. That the placebo response in so many of these children with autism is just huge. I hope you all understand what the placebo response is. But the placebo is from the Latin word meaning, I please. And when someone is given a medication, they somehow want to please us and respond. And I know that sounds kind of weird, but it is a very powerful response tool. So if I told you that you had a very bad headache and I would give you something and I'd say it's an aspirin, but it wouldn't be really an aspirin, you might actually respond and your headache actually might go away. The same is definitely true in the treatment of children. When we're paying close attention to them and they're coming to see us on a regular basis and we're giving them medication, they will often have a placebo response. And sometimes the placebo response can be almost as great, if not greater, than the actual response from the medication itself. Okay, let's move on to Trish Cohen. Okay, Trish's son is 5.5 years old. We cannot get him to use more than 3 words at a time. We can't get him to converse, even though he has good eye contact and shows emotion. We refuse to focus on activities, and he elopes. Elopes? I presume he's still single, constantly. He's on Prozac and TEDx, and we still can't catch his attention, keep him focused, and keep him still. He's been getting speech and physical therapy since he was 2.5, and we are baffled that there was no milestones yet met. What else is there to do? Okay, let's go back to basics over here. And the first thing, once again, is to come up with a very comprehensive history. And you've given us a good history here, Trish, and it sounds like you've seen a lot of people as well and been given some excellent ideas as to what to pursue. I'm very glad you've had speech therapy, and I'm glad you've had occupational and physical therapy. It sounds like that's definitely needed, especially the speech therapy. I would presume your child is in some kind of educational setting where they are addressing some aspects of his functioning as well right now. But first things first, I would certainly like to make sure that the physical examination is normal, that there are no other signs of any other syndrome or disorder which could be accounting for these situations. Very likely some laboratory testing might be warranted as well. There might be, and most importantly, further testing is important. I would strongly recommend that a comprehensive psychological evaluation be performed. Your child, it appears to me at least, would benefit from having a psychological evaluation which would include a test of cognitive capacity, of his thinking capacity, as well as of his adaptive abilities, how well he socializes, how well he performs functions of activities of daily living, such as going to the bathroom, taking care of eating, dressing himself, and also look at his educational achievement testing. And would probably also include in that some measures which are related to autism spectrum disorder. For example, something called the Autism Diagnostic Observation Scale, or the ADOS for short, or something else maybe called a Childhood Autism Rating Scale, or the CARS for short. At least for those things, I think the psychologist or your developmental pediatrician would hopefully be being able to perform those tests as well. Did I mention a hearing test? Any child who has any kind of significant language delay needs very close scrutiny of their hearing, even though a normal hearing test might have been obtained at birth, and possibly even another hearing test might have been obtained at the age of about 2 years. Okay, so that's Fisher's question, and then I think we can certainly once again take more questions as we go along, and I want you to think about the issue of ADHD at this point, to see if there's anything else that we should probably cover. I should mention while we're talking about ADHD is that it's a very heritable disorder. It's almost as heritable as your height. In other words, if you're a tall father and there's a tall mother involved, you likely will have tall children. And the same is true for ADHD. If you have ADHD and your husband or your wife has ADHD, there is a much more likelihood than not having that kind of history that your child too will have ADHD. That makes things very difficult. Because what I think I've let you to understand so far about ADHD is that a comprehensive program is warranted, and we have to have a good behavioral management program, and that has to be an organized program, and there has to be different accommodations and lots of meetings with the school teachers to make sure that these things go well. There has to be a provision of a behavioral program that is followed through with and that is consistently being provided. And guess what? The mothers and the fathers who have attention deficit themselves have difficulty in following through and even keeping that on track at all, which makes it almost doubly difficult. So that's why it's very interesting, at least in our practice over here, that when we have kids diagnosed with ADHD, we look very closely at the father and at the mother to see whether they too might have a disorder, which actually, or something, at least some challenge which they might be having, which might make it very difficult for them to implement the very treatment that they would like to see happening for their own children. It's often very difficult, in fact not often, it's always difficult for a mother or a father to be able to recognize and see any difficulty within their child. I know for myself, when my own daughters could not be invited, say, to a birthday party, when all the other girls were going to a birthday party, my daughter wasn't involved, it would tear me up. Like I would think, what's wrong? What's with this? I mean, it's a classroom. How can I not? So something as subtle and as silly as not being invited to a birthday party can just like pull you apart. And then, when more significant and more serious disorders come about, when you see your child not succeeding at school, when you see your children not making friends appropriately, when you see your child failing academically, being called to the principal's office on a constant basis, that isn't easy at all. And as a parent, when you might have had similar difficulties when you were a little boy or when you were a little girl, that really tugs at you, because it just brings up once again all those horrible memories of how things were and how school was and what it was like, and how much you had to be teased because of it, and the shame that you had to endure, and the blame that your parents had heaped on your head for having the problems, and why can't you. And then you see your own child involved in that situation. It brings all those things to the surface. And that's why addressing the needs of children with ADHD is often a family affair. It's always a family affair. Mothers and fathers are always integrally involved in the overall situation. Your children don't hurt at school and you go scot-free. It doesn't work like that. It never works like that. I think of families as this like huge organism. And some of the families I know in Phoenix at least are rather large, and there might be 5 or 6 kids in the family, and 2 parents. You know, that's 7 human beings. That's 28 limbs, and that's this huge organism, the family, with 28 limbs and 14 eyes, and everybody has to get together. And it's almost as if they're like on this waterbed of life, and when one part of it moves, the other part has to move as well. Because just like on the waterbed, nothing happens in isolation. And nothing happens in the family either in isolation, which is why it is so important for parents to get good information about what's going on. It's so important to reassure parents as well, to reassure you all out there yourselves, that it has nothing to do with poor parenting. We are all dealt a hand, and we are all supposed to play that hand as well as we can. But the responsibility for that hand and the response... Now, we can't take too much pride in our children when they do well at school. To be too prideful is inappropriate. And when they get all honors at school and everybody comes around them and says, what a wonderful kid and what a good-looking child and everything else like that, for us to take responsibility and the glory for having created that is, of course, I don't have to tell this audience, absolutely inappropriate, because the glory belongs elsewhere. And in the same vein, if our children are hurting and they have difficulties, whether it be ADHD or school problems or even autism, for us to take responsibility for that is also absolutely inappropriate. We cannot take responsibility for either. Our job is to take what we have and to help to optimize the best function for all. Okay, let's go back to Circular, who's not going to let me get off the hook about the fluoxetine. Okay, Circular, what is a small dosage? 1 ml a day. Well, if we're talking about the traditional fluoxetine, we're usually talking about 20 milligrams in 5 ml, which means in 1 ml they're 4 milligrams, right? Am I doing my math correctly, Rav Mendy? I think it is. So actually 4 milligrams would be, for me, much too high. I would actually drop it to 1 milligram, or maybe 2 milligrams. But 2 milligrams would be a fine place to start. I'm a little more conservative than most, and I would probably start it with 1 milligram. So just to bring that down to brass tacks, so to speak, if we're talking about 20 milligrams in a teaspoon, I'm talking about 1/20th of a teaspoon. Yes, it's very small. Or maybe 2/20th. That would be 2 milligrams. If you go to your pharmacy, when you get these medications, they give you special dosing syringes, which makes measuring out what I'm talking about not that bad. So it's not 1 ml, it's not half of that, which is 0.5 ml, it's a quarter of that, which is 0.25 ml. So it's between 0.25 and 5 ml is where I would start, going very slowly and monitoring for any kind of side effects, because there can be side effects from any of these medications. There can be side effects from everything. We all know there are food allergies, and there's certainly allergies and idiosyncratic or unusual responses to medications as well. So the next question is, what is slowly? And the slowly is that we don't trade up and try and get to the target dose very quickly. Fluoxetine, for example, takes a while before you get to a good amount of dosage of milligrams in the system. So I would wait on that 0.25 ml for at least a week prior to making any other changes. And after 1 week, if there were no adverse events and there were no positive effects, I would then probably increase it to 0.5 or half an ml and keep that there for another week or two before going up even further. I did imply, and by the way, I use the same kind of rationale for most medications, that when we start a medication, if after 1 week the child is getting better, I don't change the dosage, even though it's still not optimal, because I know that it's going to keep on going up. And I don't want to go up too fast, otherwise we're going to get side effects. At the same token, if the child is getting slightly worse, I don't stop the medication immediately, but follow the trend, because very often there is some slight negative behavioral patterns which emerge right at the beginning of starting most of these medications. So just wait without making any changes. It's only if the child is doing nothing, not improving, nor getting worse, that we actually start to make let the dosage go up. Okay, so here's Steve. And Steve has a question. He has twin boys. I presume they're his. And one on 20 milligrams of Focalin and one on 72 milligrams of Concerta daily. When they act up, how do we know the meds are working properly, or whether the problems is strictly behavioral or environmental? There is no behavior which is strictly behavioral or physical. Every single behavior is a mix of those. You know, there's always arguments in child development as to what's more important, the nature of the child or the nurturing of the child. And I always think of one of my Hebrew teachers when I was a little boy, when thinking about this. And I think it was about Yirmiyahu, who somehow wanted to get out of being the prophet and wasn't quite sure whether he had the right kind of character to be a prophet. And he was told, we read, from before you were formed in the womb, from before you were formed even in the womb, you were already going to be a prophet. So I remember thinking about that at that time in South Africa, in school, and thinking that's just amazing that you could actually have that kind of, that kind of destiny, that kind of individuality. The point being over here is, without getting too esoteric, that we have the child's nature and we have the child's nurture. And behavior is a constant interaction between the child's nature, their temperament, their personality, their spiritual endowment, if you will, their DNA, their RNA, their fat, their protein, and their sugar, their bodies, their physicality, and their temperament, emotional style. And you have that constant interaction between that and the environment into which they are born. And that constant interaction is what we call, they interact together to the point that one part of it, the behavioral part, actually can change the body. And it can change the environment. We know that kids can change their parents. They drive them crazy. Sanity is hereditary. You get it from your children, sort of thing. So we know that children who are very difficult can make mom and dad fight. And when mom and dad fight, children in turn can be very difficult as well. It's a very common phenomenon, and it's not only true theoretically, it's actually true when you actually do genetic studies, and you can see that the environment can actually impact the way genes are expressed. You cannot change the DNA, but you can change the way genes are actually expressed, and that's pretty amazing. So in terms of the question, when you ask that they're twin boys, one on one medication, one on other medication, how do we know if the meds are working properly or the problem is strictly behavioral environmental? We once again have to go back to looking at both of them and taking the comprehensive view. I will say that it's a very good idea when starting any medication, and for that matter when starting any alternative treatment. So many parents today want to try alternative treatments. They want to try things which are way out there. They want to try different diets, and different remedies, and different herbs, and different supplements, and homeopathy, and hyperbaric oxygen, and with all those therapies, medical as well as the proven therapies, as well as the complementary treatments which are out there. One of the first and most important steps is writing down what the target symptoms are that you're trying to address. You have to keep everyone honest, say, we want to address this behavior and that behavior and that behavior. And if we address these specific behaviors, then we will have done our job. We then start whatever we're going to start with. And 3 weeks later or 4 weeks later, we come back, and when the parents come back into my office and they say, well, my child is better or worse, I say, better or worse they might be. But let's go back to those first 3 things that you said you wanted to see. So, Steve, I don't know, when you tell me that they act up, if that was going to be the target reason for being on the medication in the first place. In general, if you're talking about sibling rivalry is not, for example, one of the core symptoms of ADHD. In other words, it implies to me that if you treat with typical ADHD medications, which it sounds like you have, you should not expect to necessarily see an improvement as far as sibling rivalry is concerned. I would like to know now what the core symptoms were, the reasons for actually beginning those medications in the first place. Was it to enhance academic performance in the classroom by having the children sit long enough in order that they pay attention to the teacher? Was it to let them sit down and do their homework at night? Was to allow them to play appropriately on the playground and paying attention to the social cues and rules that they get from other children instead of just acting wild and running from pillar to post? What were the underlying target symptoms for which the medication was actually initiated for in the first place? That's going to be a very important thing to ascertain, to determine, once again, whether the problem is strictly behavioral environmental. I would also say that in this situation, with a comprehensive treatment approach, it sounds like you do need the benefits of a counselor or someone who can help you to put the behavioral challenges that your children are having in context, and to help and provide you with actual methods and tools. Not the psychologist who sits back and tells me, what do you think of your mother, and what do you think of your father, and what about your childhood 25 years ago, and da-da-da-da, but rather very specific tools which you can utilize tonight as to how to address these problems. One of the greatest books that I know that might be, it's a little old right now, but I'm sure you can get it from the library, about siblings, sibling rivalry, is two books. One is called Siblings Without Rivalry, and the other book is called How to Talk So Kids Will Listen, and Listen So Kids Will Talk. And I think those are two books that your boys would probably benefit from at this time. When twin boys are adolescent, though, boys are trying to find themselves. They're trying to establish different pecking orders. They're trying to seek out their own individuality. They're trying to separate one from another. And indeed, this might be just in the basis of their own adolescence adjustment, the reason for some of the challenges you're seeing right now. So hopefully that's some of the answer that you can use, Steve. Didn't want to leave the can on the screen for too much, otherwise we'll get accused of having placed it by some multinational company. Not the case. Halabai, it should be like that. Anyway, I wanted to go back to talk about autism, because I think we've been focusing on ADHD right now. So let's talk a little bit about autism. Before I forget, I did want to give you a website, our website, of the Autism Center here in Phoenix. And for those of you who do have children or families with someone in a family with autism, please look us up. It's www.autismcenter.org. And if you go onto that website, www.autismcenter.org, it's got some very nice information. Plus, you can check off a box to get a free subscription to our newsletters, which is also an excellent one, and can help get you in touch with some good agencies, even where you are living. So once again, if there are questions, this is another good time to write in to help me make sure that I'm actually addressing some of the issues that you have out there. So we spoke about ADHD, and now we're going to get on to autism. In autism, there are three basic problems, just similarly to the notion of ADHD, which has the three. In autism, the three are challenges with communication, number one. Challenges with communication in terms of not having an effective and a functional system of communication. Verbal, nonverbal, all types of communications are acceptable. And if you do not have a system which you can use effectively to express yourself, to get your needs met, then you have one of the triad of what autism is all about. The second one relates to social interaction. That if you have atypical social interaction and you have the incapacity to form close relationship with peers, or even for that matter with your parents when you're very little, and it's baffling to you as to how you're supposed to figure out how to effectively interact and socially make relationships with others in your environment, then that would be the second core symptom of autism. And the third aspect of it is the children with autism often have atypical behaviors. They have repetitive and restrictive behaviors, so they might do things over and over and over again. There's a wide variety of different mannerisms or stereotypic behaviors, or what's called stimming behaviors, which these children do engage in. They might be more interested in instead of playing with the toy as a whole, they might be much more interested in playing with one small aspect of the toy, for example, the label on the back of the doll's dress, as opposed to playing with the doll as a doll, or the glass bead which forms the doll's eye, being far more fascinated in looking at that and its shape and how it works and how it will turn, than actually looking at the doll as a plaything with which they can pretend. And indeed, pretend play is one of the difficulties they have as well. So those are the three core aspects of it. And generally, when we think of autism, we think of a spectrum of disorders. And there are some children who meet all the criteria, those three criteria fully, for having what we call autistic disorder. And then if they didn't have pretty good language, and they always have had pretty good language, but they still have social problems, and they still have a narrow and restricted range of behaviors, those individuals we talk of as having Asperger's disorder. But they meet the other two criteria in the same way as children with autism do. And in between are a variety of different terms that are used to discuss other children who fall into somewhat of a gray zone. And sometimes we talk about those kids as having autism spectrum disorder, or PDD-NOS, or other more complicated terms, which I think only serve to muddy the waters and don't really provide clarity. But basically what we're talking about, a system of children, a group of children who have difficulties with communication, behavior, and with social interaction. And this is a lifelong disorder. There certainly can be fluctuations in terms of their symptoms, and many of the children's symptoms improve significantly over time and wonderfully over time. But for the most part, it's a lifelong chronic condition. It's a very difficult disorder, and it impacts, once again, not just the child, but definitely the parents, if not the grandparents and the aunts and the siblings. The siblings are really important, and maybe we'll get to discuss them in just a few minutes. So we got two more questions. So just let me finish quickly with Steve, who wants to know about increasing the medications. I would not increase the medications without doing the other things that I spoke to you about. And if the medications are addressing focus for learning primarily, which Steve, you did write in your email was the case, I would keep it there. If the behavior has come to the forefront and the constant rivalry is the issue, I would then go back, possibly take a look at those books that I recommended, and certainly seek out the possibility of counselors. Counselors are out there. They are excellent. They are well trained today. They have a good understanding of these issues. And if you can find a good one, you're in luck. And you should stay with that individual. They'd really be helpful. But looking to medication to necessarily up the medication to solve those kind of behavioral challenges, I fear you might be chasing your tail, and other difficulties will arise because we do know that when you increase medication dosages, that's the time that side effects actually arise. Okay, here's, well, lucky we got Steve and Amy on board, because if it wasn't for them, we'd have far fewer questions. Simple as that. Okay, now, what are the key components of a quality autism school program? I think a lot of that would depend on, of course, the age of the child. And also on the severity of the child and how verbal or nonverbal they actually are. I think your daughter now is beginning to express herself using 1 to 2 words. And we sometimes hear her talking in Hebrew and translate it to English, and even though she lived in Israel only when she was 1 year of age. That's pretty interesting. It's interesting the way children pick up on language. Those first year of life it's uncanny how much imprinting there goes on in the brain in the first year of life, and how much we can actually learn about child development from that. But getting back to what we need to do today, in terms of the quality autism school, I think we're looking at a number of different very basic components. First of all, I think it should be a curriculum that you should understand. I think it should be people who are qualified to actually and who have experience with actually, should go without saying, but isn't necessarily the case. There should be, parents should be absolutely welcome to come to the school whenever they want to. There should be a curriculum which is comprehensive, which you can understand. It shouldn't be so esoteric that it's just like way out there in which you don't really understand what should happen. The child should have individualized treatment. There should be an individualized educational plan so that there are specific issues and recommendations and plans being made to address, and methods of how to do that to address your particular child's needs. It's clear today, I think, that we absolutely need a strong behavioral component. So the ABA is the overall umbrella, applied behavioral analysis of the types of principles which go on behind the scenes as far as behavioral intervention programs. Here in Phoenix, we follow the pivotal response treatment model coming out of Santa Barbara, and feel very much that taking the principles of applied behavioral analysis and trying to apply them in the most naturalistic of environments would be appropriate. While I'm talking about naturalistic environments, I think it would be, to me, almost essential that children with autism be integrated to the fullest extent possible. There must be typical behavioral peers who can serve as models for them as far as their language is concerned, as far as their communication is concerned, as far as their behavior is concerned. You can take the most severely disordered, huge adolescent child with autism who's extremely aggressive and belligerent, and putting them in a mainstream environment with appropriate treatment plans around them will change that child significantly. It's a very difficult thing to do bureaucratically, and there are lots of logistics involved with actually trying to do that. But especially the younger children, mainstreaming is absolutely key. If we don't give the younger children a chance to mainstream, there might just never be that chance. So I'm a strongest advocate for trying to make law integrated effectively, and the children with autism are not in a substantially separate program away from everyone in the basement or in a substantially separate school program, but they participate with all their peers, typical as well as those with autism, and learn from them all. And it's very important for the kids who are typical to learn from the children with autism as well, and to appreciate diversity, and to learn about differences, and how to respect them, and please God in the future, how to employ them. Because down the line, these children are going to need employment, and it's going to take individuals who are being exposed to individuals with disabilities all their lives to hire individuals with disabilities, and not to be fearful of them and treat them or whatever else like that, but to say, I was a kid with autism in my class, and they're fine, and I'm going to hire this kid, and it's going to work out well. And indeed, it often does. So I'm pretty passionate about that. So that's a pretty long-winded answer, I know, to the issue of what would make up a great school program. So here's another question which has been given to me by the panel here in Phoenix, as to, as a parent of a child with autism, what can we expect in the coming years in terms of medical breakthroughs? The good news is that there is a groundswell of interest in autism. I think autism was on the front page of Time magazine, on the cover of Time magazine twice last year, if not 3 times. We're just seeing such amazing press. You can't open up a newspaper, a magazine, anywhere. I was in Israel last year, went to Alut, and the same is true over there, and the same is true in Korea, and the same is true in South Africa, where I'm from, and all over the world. There is a huge groundswell of people who are saying we have to find answers. And the NIH and the NIMH and the government in the United States has set up and 2 years ago passed a combating autism bill, which will increase the amount of funds flowing to autism research exponentially. Autism has always been a stepchild, not only as far as funding is concerned, but also, parents for the longest time were too embarrassed to come out of the closet and even admit their children had autism. Well, that's another story, and hopefully we never see that era again, because it is a terribly sad era in the times of autism. With all that money coming down, I want to tell you that the brightest and the best minds in our country are right now focused on trying to find the key to the door of autism. They're coming in from a lot of different perspectives, from a brain anatomy perspective, from neurophysiology and electroencephalograms, from imaging perspectives, and also from the genetic perspective. We strongly believe that autism is a genetic condition, and as soon as we're able to understand what makes those differences different in children with autism, and as soon as we understand what, what the proteins are that those genes actually code for, the sooner we're able to do that, the sooner we'll eventually be able to come up with a breakthrough. It's slow going, it's painstaking, but there's lots of dollars involved, and the bright minds in science today are working hard right here in Phoenix. We have wonderful organizations, including our own at SARC, where that's without any question the goal. First of all, I think the first step is going to be, excuse me one second. The first step, I think, would be to identify a test by which we'll be able to identify autism very early on. And that will possibly be in the form of a blood test, like a yield stick, just like we have a test today that we can test up to 20 newborn diseases, inborn errors of metabolism at the time of birth when the baby has a heel stick. One of those 21st or the 22nd, I hope, that there will be a test for autism as well. That will probably be the first thing which I think we'll be able to do. And I think there's lots of progress on that front. The next breakthrough will be most likely in the area of different medications which are being tested to see if they might actually impact children with autism. And finally, the final answer will be when we can understand the genetic makeup of those children and be able to do something to actually engineer the genes to more effectively function so that our children, please God, one day will be cured. So that's the story about what we can hope for about autism. Here we have a question from Mark Katzenellenbogen. What a lovely name, Katzenellenbogen. How supportive is the Phoenix Jewish community and the state of Arizona? I know that you are fortunate to have far more better service than Texas, which is near not the bottom. From a website I saw Phoenix has the Federation all on the board, the JFS/Fed, etc., all on board for at least the last 20 years. No, it's a parent-driven movement. I think that if it wasn't for parents, and the parents around the country are all up in arms saying, we need to do something, we need to change things. But it's also been some key individuals. And Rabbi Mendy Levertov and his wife here in Phoenix are stellar examples of people who stood up and said, you know, we're going to take the challenge as well. We might not be scientists, but what we do know, we know well. And we know how to work with kids, and we know how to integrate them, and we know how to give them a good time, and we know how to make sure that each of them are honored and respected in the most appropriate way possible. So Phoenix is very lucky and very fortunate to have people like Rabbi Mendy right here to make sure that that the kids have something to do on a Sunday afternoon, or on any afternoon for that matter, and actually have programs available to them. Because it takes a village, and it's not going to be just me, and it's not going to be just you. It's going to take hundreds and hundreds of people to make sure that any one particular child is taken care of. It's a huge, huge challenge. The Phoenix Jewish community is right on board. We have some excellent examples of different group homes which have been set up for children with disabilities who live together and do very well. We have a council for Jews for special needs here in Phoenix. We have the Friendship Circle, which I don't have to introduce this audience to at all. And we have many individuals who work within their congregations to try to make sure that those congregations as well, that the different kehilot have an opportunity to welcome families who have children with differences as well. Because if the spiritual communities aren't going to do that, no one's going to. But I think that they do rise to the occasion. Come out to his annual Friendship Circle Appreciation Awards dinner. You'll see what I mean. Okay. Now we have another question about from Claire, who has a 12-year-old daughter with Asperger's who is alone most of the time. She does not show emotion. How do I know if she's lonely or sad? Kids with Asperger disorder often have different ways of expressing emotion, and it's often a challenge for them, and we don't really know how to do that. I think that we have to be fairly perfunctory and fairly matter-of-fact about actually teaching children how to discern emotions, not only in others, which they have often had extreme difficulty in doing. Just like you think she might have difficulty in having expressing emotion, I think Claire might well be rather puzzled as to how you express emotion. and what you do when you're feeling angry, and what you do when you're feeling sad, or what you do when you're feeling embarrassed, or disappointed, or elated, or excited. And I think those things actually have to be taught very pragmatically. It sounds like your daughter is definitely a candidate for a social skills program. There are a lot of different books to read as well, which I think might help you to understand children's emotions better and help her to understand as well. There's a book called Asperger's Like Me, and there's a whole array of books for children and adolescent girls with Asperger disorders. Over here in Phoenix, we have a wonderful program for girls, a social program for girls with Asperger disorder. Usually more boys are identified than girls, and the focus for many years has been on boys with Asperger disorder. But we certainly know that the girls with Asperger disorder have a really, really tough time socially, especially at the age of 12 and 13, when all the other girls seem to be yapping and having a great time and gossiping, and children with Asperger disorder are so much left on the side. Hopefully they can be in a community where they can establish some kind of peer counseling to get another one of the 12-year-old girl leaders in the classroom, be appointed a peer counselor to the daughter would be absolutely wonderful, so that she can take your daughter by the hand and say, "Come on, Claire, we are going right now, and we're going to go into the midst of the throng and sit together at lunch, and we're going to walk together at recess, and I'm going to invite you to my home on Saturday night, and you can be part of that." I hope and I would pray that your school has the capacity and has the forethought and the foresight to actually think about setting up programs like that. Once again, it's God's work to do that, and it's essential that we do that. So, yes, in the same way, I did mention brothers and sisters as well. Hopefully, they have an opportunity as well to sit around separately from their brother and sister with disability and talk about some of the challenges that they have. Siblings have a tough time. When you're a sibling and you watch your brother and sister being teased and being bullied and being laughed at, and then making a huge noise and doing silly things with their bodies, and you have to watch this and watch your parents suffer. It's very tough for those siblings as well, especially if you know that one day it's going to be your turn to take over and to do for your siblings like your parents have done for them. It's a real difficult situation. And if there's one thing that you can please take back to your community, is that for the typical brothers and sisters of children with either with ADHD, but definitely with autism, please find out how you can establish a sibling support program. That will be one thing that will really change the face of your community. Well, folks, we've come to the end of the hour, so I just wanted to let you know that it's a pleasure to spend time with you, and I hope we can continue to celebrate lots of good things together, and that we can continue to celebrate those with differences as well together, because that's, I think, is how our civilization is going to be judged, about how good a job we do in terms of taking care of those who do not have voice in our community. So I wish you all good night, and thank you very much for your attention. Okay, I'd also like to thank once again to Bensi from North Carolina for setting this all up, and to Rabbi Mendy Levitov for organizing it, and to his wife. And so thank you very much, everybody, and good night. Good night.